Hey everyone, welcome back to the Becoming Anchored podcast. We're so glad you're here with us today. We're super excited about this episode. We've got a very lovely, wonderful guest. I'll introduce her in just a minute. I'm Lauren Jackson, one of the hosts here. This is Laura Deneen, our other wonderful host. We are part of a group private practice in the Brentwood, Tennessee area. We specialize in treating eating disorders, body image concerns, anxiety, grief, OCD, life transition, trauma, all of that through the lifespan. We adore what we do. We've really loved jumping on this platform and connecting with you guys in this way. So, quick disclaimer before we do jump into the content. This podcast and this episode is not meant to be your therapy. It is for informational purposes only. So if you're finding that as you're listening and you're engaging with us that you could benefit from therapy, if you're local, reach out. We'd love to connect with you and get you connected with a therapist. If you're not local, find somebody near you who is licensed. So today, I'll do a quick intro. We have Jamison Worley here. She's a phenomenal dietitian in Franklin, Tennessee area. I'll let her tell you what she works with, but we work with her a lot. We love her dearly. Yeah, we're excited to jump in and talk to you, Jamison, about our topic for the day.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, so if you're new to the Becoming Anchored show, welcome. This has been such a fun and life-giving opportunity for us, and it's really just been a wonderful way to connect with some of our folks and some of the people that we love in the Nashville community. And so Lauren actually had the idea of starting this podcast, and I jumped on board. And so it's been just a wonderful time to talk about our humanity and all the things that been hardships and are hardships for both of us. And then we also have the gift of sitting with clients on a daily basis. And so we love what we do. It really is such a gift and such sacred work. And so we are here to talk about our shared humanity with you all, with our listeners, and to hopefully provide some nuggets of wisdom to you all as well. So welcome and thanks for being here. Like Lauren said, we have Jamison on the show. Today, we are going to be talking about Relative Energy Deficiency. Am I getting that right? The acronym?
Okay. Yes, it's Relative Energy Deficiency in sport.
In sport. Okay. So Jamison works quite frequently with clients presenting with body image concerns, and she's a dietitian by trade. So I will let her share a little bit more about her practice at the end of the show. But she does work quite frequently with athletes and really looking at their meal plans, their intake, and how she can better support them. And this just felt like a really niche topic that Jamison actually has so much wisdom around. And so without further ado, Jamison, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, you guys. Our practice freaking loves anchored counseling.
So kind. It's a very mutual feeling. So much love today. I love it.
Yes.
Yeah, but okay, can you just share a little bit more, just presenting this topic, right? What REDS is, the work that you do with clients, and yeah, I'll just go ahead and let you jump right in.
Yeah. I think like a little bit of background could help too. So basically, I grew up as an athlete. I was a soccer player like my entire life. And then as I went through schooling and found my love for nutrition, what got me into that was working with a sports dietitian in my undergrad college at UT, and just found a whole love for that as well. Just working with athletes, helping fuel their bodies, all the things. And then went up to grad school in Boston, and one of my rotations, as a dietitian, you have to go through a dietetic internship. And so one of my rotations there was at Harvard University. And so working with their athletes or their sports dietitian, PRN. And so I was used to working at UT, working with the big sports, right? So football, basketball, we would take the football players to the grocery store, teach the basketball team how to make a smoothie. It was all this education. It was really fun.
I love it
right?
so much.
It was so fun. And then I got up to Harvard and I was thinking the same thing. I was like, this is awesome, right? And I'm from here, so very naive to all the northern sports, but Northeast sports. So they have everything's weight-based up there, and it's very individualized sports. So I remember my first day on the job, I was like, what team are we going to teach how to do smoothies today? And I remember the dietitian I was working with, her name's Meg. I still to this day, I love her. She was like, no, we have one-on-one counseling. We're working with eating disorders. And I was like, what? I was so shocked. But anyways, it was such an amazing learning experience. And that's what got me into this whole field. My love for sports mixed with the eating disorder piece. It's a whole world that I think I knew as an athlete, but didn't truly understand. I was almost like naive to it. And then moving into that space, just being like, whoa, there's so much more to this. Coming back here, I ended up working with eating disorders, then moved on to the sports world. Now I have my own practice, and it's still my favorite, by one of my favorite clienteles to work with, no matter what, who the athlete is, whether basically the definition of an athlete is someone who moves their body to train, right? So when you look at it that way, it can be the individual going to a workout class a couple of days a week, or it can be the elite athlete or any of these Olympic athletes. And so I think that's really important to know too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, so that's my background piece. But with that, I've learned to develop or work with what's called REDS. So like Relative Energy Deficiency in sport. And this actually started off, do y'all remember the Female Athlete Triad?
I was going to ask you about that because I did my undergrad in dietetics. I didn't go on to do internship. I didn't become registered, but that was something that we learned about in undergrad. And I was going to ask you about that. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Yes. So the same thing.
Okay.
Basically, it started with Female Athlete Triad. So what they looked at is they looked at the underfueling piece, and then they also looked at the triad. So it would be the underfueling, the menstrual cycle, and then bone health. And then obviously in females. And so what happened was in 2014, the International Olympic Committee was like, well, hold on. There's like also males in sports, right? There's more than just like periods and underfueling and bone health. There's like a whole spectrum. And so that's when they developed REDS, or moved the Female Athlete Triad over to REDS, which is the term for Relative Energy Deficiency in sport.
Interesting.
So that's how it all started from there, if that makes sense. And then, we'll get more into this, but basically they then created a screening tool for REDS in 2015. There was an update to REDS in 2018. Then there was the latest update was actually this past fall in 2023, which has an updated screening tool and all these things that we can use as providers for just looking at athletes. Because one of the things I find with athletes is there can be two different spectrums. It can be underfueling intentionally, right? So that's like our eating disordered eating, and then they're fueling unintentionally. And I think that was something I had to learn because I was always coming at it from an eating disorder lens. So anyone that came in, I was like, well, this is eating disorder, all these kind of things. But you do just have athletes that truly don't have the knowledge to understand how to body work, especially a lot of our athletes, right? I have a client right now who is an amazing athlete, a 15-year-old, and just essentially decided to try a new sport, was really good at it, and developed mono in the middle of the season. Know that. So it's like this whole thing that he was underfueling, had no idea, had low energy. Granted, the mono was a piece. And by the time he got diagnosed with mono, there's a whole thing there, right? And so instead of looking at it as an eating disorder, it's now just the education of, hey, it was very unintentional. How can we just teach you how to fuel your body from that piece?
Yeah. I'm curious what types of questions you're asking. And I'm sure that you are doing assessment, right, for a possible eating disorder. Or maybe you've gotten a referral from a therapist who's working with a client with an eating disorder. But I'm just curious what you ask to determine intention behind the underfueling that is happening in your clients.
Yeah, great question. It can come from so many different ways. A lot of it comes from referrals, right? So a lot of times, like I'll get whether a psych provider or a doctor, pediatrician, primary care doctor, or even a therapist is referring them over to me. And so it's already an underlying issue that they're working on with somebody from that realm. The other thing is just the screening tool in general. So a lot of things that we go through is menses cycles, like I was mentioning earlier. So like primary menses is essentially with a female, if they prolong or they're not starting their period up until 15 years old, that's like a big red flag, right? So that's like especially while they were in sport, but they're still growing in other ways. And then you have secondary, right? Which means that essentially they started their period, but then they've missed some of it. So that can be a piece that we always look at. For males, it's testosterone. So looking at that piece, like always get lab work and everything done for that. Bone stress injuries, so that's a big thing that we're screening for. So looking at just their bone health overall. Immune system, there's a whole case or piece to it. And I'm happy to, if any of the people listening or if any of y'all's listeners want any information on this, I'm happy to provide how the triad, right? Just those three little things turn into this whole spectrum of things. But the things that you screen for REDS now, instead of just having, like I said earlier, the menses, the bone health, and the underfueling, it's now the immune system, the gut, the heart, psychological, so like mental illness, growth and development. So with our adolescents, like we're going metabolic, if there's anything metabolic going on, the endocrine system, so hormones, and then also like the bone health and the menstrual cycles. There's a big screening spectrum now that you're looking at.
Yeah.
But going back to the intentional or unintentional, the certain things that we always ask is what sparked it, right? And there's always that underlying behavior. I know you guys know all of this too. Past history, family history of eating disorders, there's just a lot.
Yeah, very complex.
Totally. And I know you said that y'all had Sarah Beth on there to talk about the identity piece. I think that's also a big, I'm sure there's a lot of information in there too, of just the identity and of an athlete in general. There's certain type A, there's just a lot there too that can also be screened for.
How often would you say that you see that a client truly presents with just REDS and no eating disorder, no disordered eating, no body image concerns?
That's a really good question. I'm thinking of my current caseload, and I actually have a good amount. And if I can put it into numbers, I probably have got 10 clients right now with REDS, and I would say it's pretty half and half as eating disorder, like intentional or unintentional.
Sure.
Well, it's just providing education. They're willing to learn. So if they're willing to learn and to implement, and there's no quote unquote issue per se with implementation, then you know that they're wanting to essentially be better for their sport. Whereas the eating disorder piece, like as you educate or you get into it, and there's no implementation or it's hard to implement, that's either we'll send off a referral if they don't already have a therapist and build out the team. But it's pretty half and half right now, which is crazy.
I'm curious how it goes when you present. Is there a sense of relief of, oh, wow, somebody sees me in this, in my pain and in all of these things that I've been struggling with? Or is there a sense of shock or shame? Like, how are your clients receiving this REDS diagnosis from you?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. All the above. It depends on the athlete. Like I've got a client right now a wrestler, for instance, who is truly just the underfueling piece. I've got another wrestler that's definitely the eating disorder piece. So it's the presentation is more of one of the things that's helpful that I found with my clients is screening. So being able to show them the screening tools that I have and walk them through it. It's like when you have an adolescent who's going through eating disorder recovery or they're having to restore weight or anything like that, like being able to show them their growth charts helps sometimes to be like, hey, this is why we're doing these things and this is why we're concerned, or this is why we have got red flags coming up, so they can, essentially see the evidence. And it's not like they're just meeting this person to be like, you have to eat more or fuel around this. Like they can actually understand it. And I feel like the population is really good with that because with a true athlete, in a sense, they're wanting, that's that identity piece. And so it's hard to break that identity. And they know if they need to fuel, they'll do it for their sport to be better or whatever their goal is. So I think that's a big piece.
Yeah.
With
it's
them
like,
specifically.
Yeah, it's motivation in a way, right? Of, oh, wow, I want to be able to perform to the best of my abilities. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting in the therapeutic space. Of course, we are not like providing meal plans, right? We're referring to providers like you and being like, hey, Dr. Jamison, and we'll do all the emotional work and boundaries and all the other things that come up after you give a meal plan. But I'm curious, another question that I had is when you do present to someone with REDS what their body actually needs, what their response is, because oftentimes what we see in the practice, and I hesitate to do like a generalized statement, but oftentimes what comes up is, oh my gosh, my dietitian told me that I need this much food. And can you believe it, Laura? And then we will talk through all of their feelings and thoughts and emotions around that. But I would imagine that is probably something that you see quite frequently in your practice too, of like utter shock that our bodies could need as much food as you're telling them they need.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. The shock is like the level goes through the roof. And I think that's the biggest thing, right? And you'll get, yes, I think, again, it depends on what sport and all the things and what the type of athlete you've got in your door. But that's a big thing that our practice focuses on. And that's like my big thing that I preach on is education is empowerment. Being able to bring a client into your office and just educate them and so they can understand. Like I always start there. I'm like, hey, let's just talk about what you're doing now And let's talk about why you're here. So a lot of times they'll be there because their energy is low, or they've missed their period, or they're not competing at their best ability, or they're like losing out on races or whatever it is, right? So we start with goals. What's your goal, right? And whether it's like long-term, short-term, that kind of thing. And so when they're able to go through their goals, we're able to get some data and educate them on how you can achieve your goals from a nutrition standpoint. They're able to hear it a little bit better. And also, it's still really hard. I mean, I've had some athletes that I've put on, not to talk calories necessarily, but on 10,000 calorie diets because this is just what their body needs in terms of just like their training regimen. And yeah, of course, that's a shock, right? They're like, what? But being able to put it out in a way that's feasible for them, I think just the understanding piece is key for this population to be like, hey, you're burning more than you think, or again, dependent on the client and what their body. So it's all over the board. But yes, it always comes as a shock. Always.
Yeah. Would you say, and I feel like I maybe know the answer to this, but I'm just curious from your like experience with your clients, that somebody who develops RED-S and you diagnose with that, would you say that they have more of a predisposition to go on to develop an eating disorder? Or would you say that maybe there's not necessarily like a correlation there?
It's actually a really good question. I need to go back to the actual research or update that just came back this past fall to give you like specific information. I do know there was a statistic in there that said up to 60% of all athletes have RED, right? So not necessarily coming at it from like the eating disorder piece, but that could come at it from both ways, right? But the development of eating disorder afterwards, I think if they're in the care with someone who's coming in from an unintentional level, right? So someone comes in just to say, hey, I'm not performing best, no eating disorder present, and all that kind of thing. And they start to fuel their body. I think keeping with them and still having that support. So whether that's adding a team, even if it's not an eating disorders, like adding a therapist. I mean, psych is mental health is so important with athletes. And having the dietitian to continue to encourage them and educate them, right, as they continue their training is really important to help prevent that down the road.
Totally.
And you are just like a couple of sessions, you're like, hey, this is what your body needs. And then they go out. One of the things I always talk about is like macro diet culture, macro culture, and micro culture. I actually learned this from my supervisor, which I love using with clients of macro culture is like our overall diet culture, right? So whatever that looks like. And then micro culture is that sport specific culture. So you've got an athlete, that's that macro diet culture of just what an athlete needs to look like, fuel, all that kind of stuff. The micro culture is within your sport. So that's as you're a crew, doing crew, wrestling, running, whatever that is, and just teaching clients or educating clients how to pull out red flags within macro culture and micro culture to hopefully prevent that as well as they move their sport.
Yeah.
Because they could have an amazing coach in middle school or something and then go to high school and have a coach who's very into diet culture or whatever it is. And so for you to just educate on, hey, these are some red flags as you get there so that they at least know.
Totally.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up. This is part of my own story. I had a very harmful coaching experience when I was on the cross-country team, and a coach that was not a dietitian and should not have been telling the team what to eat or what not to eat. And unfortunately, a lot of our clients have been harmed by or role models, and they're at a tender age when this happens, and they don't necessarily have the ego strength to say, you know what, I disagree with you, and why, right? Like we can't necessarily expect that of a 15 or 16-year-old.
Right.
We are quite impressionable, I think, at those ages, and we also, or at least maybe believe that part of us is like invincible. And yeah, I think it's so amazing that you are providing such accurate, intentional, healthy psychoeducation to these athletes to hopefully provide them with the foundation to be able to fuel their bodies like from the present moment to future encounters. But yeah, that was part of my story as well, where I did have a harmful experience with a coach, and that was really formative for me. And I've since done the trauma work around that, but I do remember that distinctly just as you share.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing, because it's real. It's so real out there. It's so real. And that's like a lot of times even with some of my clients, I'll pull their coach into the treatment team, depending, just because it's, hey, if you've got questions, like run through me. Or if you're telling him this, not to tell you what to tell your peers or even like you who you're coaching, but at least to have that piece to know that like this client's working with someone who's a little more informative or has more informative care around whatever sport this is. Because it is. It's there. The world of social media, the world of coaches, all of it. There's just so much misinformation out there. And I think this is a big population that gets targeted between like supplements and looking certain ways and all the things.
Yeah.
So it's no joke.
Yeah. And it can be quite traumatic, I think, for our clients because there is this posture of, well, my coach knows best. There's a trust, there's a relationship there. And of course, when that attachment is there with someone like a coach, and then they're hearing from you that, oh, wait, this person shared misinformation with me or has caused or has been a part of the reason that I've gone on to develop REDS, like that's a lot to digest and to work through, both with a dietitian and with a therapist, hopefully. And so I have a lot of compassion for our clients that have had these harmful experiences. And I think sometimes coaches, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Jamison and Lauren, just I know both having been in the sports worlds, but I don't think necessarily coaches intend to harm. They maybe want their athletes to perform the best to their abilities, and that still doesn't make it okay. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah, Laura, I have.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
Go ahead, Lauren.
No, I was just going to share another story. I grew up doing all kinds of sports, but then landed on ballet as my sport. And ballet is very, what's the word, like image focused, like ballerina have a certain look, if you will. And yeah, I remember, and this wasn't as impressionable on me because I was already like in the depths of my eating disorder. And the thing that one of my ballet teachers said wasn't quite as like impactful because I already had like my things that I was doing. But yeah, he made this one comment, and I won't say what it is because it's not helpful and it's not necessarily important, but it was just a really, now that I look back on it now, the very strange, like it was just very strange food advice that he was giving that I remember definitely had an impact on some of the people that I was like in class with. And I look back on that and I feel angry. Like I felt anger about that. And like you said, Laura, I don't think he was trying to do harm, but it did cause harm. And I think that's something that probably our clients in some ways wrestle with is, yeah, some of that trust piece and what to do with that. But like, okay, what information, right? That there was some sort of like boundary violation or injustice. The adult self is like trying to protect your younger self that was maybe more vulnerable to receiving that kind of advice in air quotations, if you're watching. So, yeah. And I think there's a humility for coaches, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, Jamison, of like being corrected or called out or challenged. And that takes a lot of humility for them to talk to you on the phone or come with the athlete to your office and recognize that they may have caused harm or apologize or what have you. And it does take humility to admit that we were wrong or we didn't know any better, et cetera, et cetera. So I can see that happening in your office too.
Yeah, it's tough, right? And I think you guys are so spot on of just like, sometimes it's just not intentional. Like it's not meant to happen, right? Like it's just, there's so much misinformation out. There's so much in the world of like marketing and supplements and whatever, you name it. It's so easy to hold on to these things, like the TikToks and all that kind of stuff. Like if you're rushing or being targeted by certain things day after day, like you're going to fall for some of these things. And I think coaches can play that role. But it's just, to me, going back to having them on the care team, like they're the most important person to me on the care team just because they're with the athlete more than any of us are, right? Like they're with them all the time. They're coaching them. They're using language. And again, whether it's intentional or unintentional, but an athlete wants to be the best of their sport. And that's what a coach is helping them do, right? And so again, whatever the language can be, some people are just more predispositioned to hearing some language and taking it to heart when others aren't, right? And so I think that's just the big thing is being able to, no matter what, what we all do in our office, we advocate for our client. And so how can we look at that from an athlete perspective and then also just from a fueling perspective and just giving them all knowledge? It's a lot. It's the whole spectrum.
Yeah, well, you are certainly a wealth of knowledge, and we're so grateful just for your wisdom today. Thank you for your time. And I know that Jamison had little ones at home and you own a business, and so you're not busy at all. But we really are grateful for your time today. So we always close with an affirmation and homework. Jamison, would you like to provide one or both of those things if you would like to?
I'm trying to think. Give me an example. Give me something that you guys...
Yeah. And so homework might be something that's coming to mind for me, for our listeners, is really, I know we use that word misinformation, and it really just stuck out to me.
Right.
And well, twofold, right? I mean, the things that have stuck out to me today, I mean, you know a lot more about the nutrition piece. And so obviously you're not going to recommend nutrition advice on this podcast because I know that each person is so individualized and their experience is so unique. But I think looking at perhaps sources of information, have you experienced misinformation as you've been in the world of nutrition and trying to fuel your bodies? I think that stands out to me. I'm just really encouraging our listeners to get curious about possible misinformation that they've had or possible harmful experiences with coaches, and really looking at what they need as a result of having lived through those experiences. So that feels like appropriate homework. I don't know if you have anything that you would add.
No, I think that's great. I think the world of misinformation, yes, is so large. So being able to understand like red flags. I always say this just from a nutrition specific perspective of if you're ever looking at anything and something's either the worst case scenario or something's about, meaning like a food or a sport or anything, that it's automatically a red flag. Something that's too bad, there's something that's too good. So I think that's always something I tell my clients is just understanding it, writing it down, ask questions, whether you have a therapist, a doctor, a dietitian, instead of falling into these things.
Yeah.
It's easy to be.
Yeah. And then an affirmation too. Lauren, do you have one, or I'm happy to provide one as well?
Yeah. I'm thinking about just you deserve to fuel your body completely, well, totally, fully what it needs. And you're allowed to question and listen to your body, right? I think that's like just,
yeah. Well, and we talk a lot in the practice about building trust in our bodies, right? And so that's what I hear as you say that, right? This is an encouragement and a challenge to build back trust with your body. Jamison, how can our listeners find you?
Yeah, so you can find us we're on social media. So Worley Nutrition Group, Facebook, Instagram. We have a website, so www.worleynutritiongroup.com. We've got a newsletter. We call it the Tuesday Toast. It goes out every Tuesday. So you can subscribe to that via our social media or even on our website. And again, our big thing is education is empowerment. Our Tuesday Toast posts every Tuesday are specific to just education. We talk a lot about red, but it's just something to be able to educate everybody of what's going on in the nutrition world.
I was actually just talking to Jamison before we started recording about how much I love your Tuesday Toast newsletter. I always know Tuesday morning it's going to be in my inbox, and I love it. So yeah, keep up the great work there. Thank you again for being on the show and for your time today. We're just so grateful. Lauren and I just adore you. So thanks again for being here on the Becoming Anchored podcast. Y'all take care.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.